Sarah Martinez had always been different. While other girls her age were playing with dolls, she was in the backyard practicing martial arts moves she learned from watching old Bruce Lee movies. Her father, a former Marine, had taught her that strength wasn't just about muscles, it was about heart, determination, and the will to never give up. Growing up in a small Texas town, Sarah faced her share of challenges. She was the only daughter in a family of 4 boys, and her mother had passed away when she was just 12 years old. Her father worked double shifts at the local factory to keep food on the table, which meant Sarah often had to fend for herself and help raise her younger brothers. The bullying started in middle school. Sarah was tall for her age, with broad shoulders and calloused hands from helping her father with construction work on weekends. The popular girls called her names, said she looked like a boy, and made fun of her worn-out clothes and work boots. But Sarah learned early that words could only hurt if you let them. When she turned 16, her father signed her up for a local mixed martial arts gym. "You've got the heart of a fighter," he told her one evening after she came home with a black eye from defending her youngest brother from neighborhood bullies. "But you need to learn how to use that heart the right way." The gym was a rough place. Most of the fighters were grown men with prison tattoos and aggressive attitudes. The owner, a former UFC fighter named Marcus, wasn't sure what to do with a teenage girl who wanted to learn how to fight. But Sarah proved herself quickly. She showed up every day, never complained, and took hits that would have sent other people running home. Marcus became like a second father to her. He taught her discipline, technique, and most importantly, control. "Fighting isn't about hurting people," he would say during their training sessions. "It's about protecting yourself and others who can't protect themselves. The moment you fight for the wrong reasons is the moment you become everything we're fighting against." Sarah spent 4 years at that gym. She learned boxing, kickboxing, jiu-jitsu, and wrestling. She competed in amateur competitions across the state, winning more often than she lost. But more than the trophies and medals, she gained something more valuable: confidence in herself and her abilities. After graduating high school, Sarah knew she wanted to serve her country. Her father had instilled in her a deep love for America and a desire to make a difference. She also knew that the military would provide her with opportunities she might not get in her small hometown. So she enlisted in the Navy. Boot camp was tough, but Sarah had been preparing for this kind of challenge her entire life. While other recruits struggled with the physical demands and mental pressure, Sarah thrived. Her drill instructors recognized her potential early on and recommended her for special warfare training. The path to becoming a Navy SEAL was not open to women at the time, but Sarah could train with support personnel and work alongside SEAL teams in various capacities. She was assigned to a specialized unit that provided combat support and intelligence gathering for SEAL operations. Her first deployment took her to Afghanistan. Sarah served as a communications specialist and cultural advisor, working directly with SEAL Team 7. The work was dangerous and demanding, but Sarah proved herself time and again. She could hike for miles with a full pack, operate complex radio equipment under fire, and maintain her composure in the most stressful situations. The SEALs she worked with initially treated her with skepticism. They had never worked closely with a woman before, and many questioned whether she belonged in their world. But Sarah didn't let their doubts affect her. She focused on doing her job better than anyone expected and proving that she deserved to be there. During her second deployment, Sarah's unit was stationed at a forward operating base in a particularly dangerous region of Afghanistan. The base housed approximately 300 personnel, including 282 Navy SEALs from multiple teams who were conducting operations in the area. The living conditions were harsh, with constant threats from enemy fire and the stress of knowing that any mission could be their last. Despite the dangers they faced together, some of the SEALs continued to treat Sarah differently because she was a woman. Most were professional and respectful, but there were a few who seemed to take pleasure in making her life difficult. They would make crude comments, exclude her from informal gatherings, and generally try to make her feel like an outsider. Two SEALs in particular, Johnson and Roberts, seemed to have made it their personal mission to push Sarah until she broke. Johnson was a tall, muscular man from Alabama who had joined the Navy straight out of high school. He had a reputation for being aggressive and had been disciplined multiple times for inappropriate behavior. Roberts was his close friend and enabler, a shorter but stocky man from Nevada who had a chip on his shoulder about authority and women in the military. These two men would go out of their way to make Sarah's life miserable. They would accidentally bump into her during chow time, causing her to spill her food. They would make loud comments about how women didn't belong in combat zones. They would time their visits to the communication tent to coincide with when Sarah was working alone, making inappropriate suggestions and crude jokes. Sarah reported their behavior through proper channels, but in the military culture of that time, such complaints were often dismissed as personality conflicts or misunderstandings. Her commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Stevens, was a good man but was overwhelmed with operational responsibilities. He spoke to Johnson and Roberts about maintaining professional behavior, but little changed. The situation came to a head during a particularly stressful period. The base had been under increased enemy pressure, with daily rocket attacks and intelligence suggesting a major assault was being planned. Everyone was on edge and tensions were running high. Sarah had been working 18-hour days, coordinating communications between multiple SEAL teams operating in the field. She had barely slept in 3 days and was running on coffee and determination. Her hands were shaking from exhaustion, and her usually perfect military bearing was beginning to show cracks. It was during this vulnerable time that Johnson and Roberts decided to escalate their harassment. They had been drinking contraband alcohol in their quarters and decided to pay Sarah a visit at the communications center. The center was located in a converted shipping container at the edge of the base, somewhat isolated from the main buildings. Sarah was alone, monitoring multiple radio frequencies and updating mission status reports when the two men entered. She immediately smelled alcohol on them and knew this encounter would be different from their previous harassment. "Well, well," Johnson said, his words slightly slurred. "Look what we have here. Little Sarah all alone, playing soldier." "You need to leave," Sarah said firmly, not looking up from her equipment. "You're not authorized to be in here and you've been drinking." Roberts laughed and moved closer. "What are you going to do about it? Report us again?" "Nobody cares what you think, sweetheart." Sarah stood up and faced them. Even though she was tired and outnumbered, her training kicked in. She assessed the situation quickly, 2 intoxicated men, both larger than her, blocking the only exit. Her radio equipment was delicate and expensive. A fight in here could damage critical communications gear that the teams in the field depended on. "I'm asking you one more time to leave," she said, her voice steady despite the fear she felt. Johnson moved closer, invading her personal space. "You know what your problem is? You think you're as good as us, but you're not. You're just a girl playing dress-up. And we're going to show you exactly what you are," Roberts added, stepping to Sarah's other side. Sarah knew she had to act. Her father's words echoed in her mind. Never start a fight, but always finish one. Her martial arts training told her to stay calm and wait for the right moment. But her military training told her that sometimes you have to take the initiative to prevent a worse outcome. "Back off," she warned one final time. Johnson reached out to grab her shoulder. "Make me." What happened next would become the stuff of legend among the SEALs at the base, though it took some time for the full story to emerge. Sarah's years of martial arts training, combined with her military conditioning and the adrenaline of the moment, created a perfect storm. She moved faster than either man expected. Using a technique Marcus had taught her years ago, she grabbed Johnson's outstretched arm, pivoted her hip, and threw him over her shoulder. The big SEAL crashed into a rack of radio equipment, sending sparks flying and alarms beeping. Roberts, surprised by the sudden violence, rushed at Sarah with a wild haymaker punch. She ducked under his swing, stepped inside his reach, and delivered a precise uppercut to his solar plexus. The blow knocked the wind out of him and sent him stumbling backward into the wall. But the fight wasn't over. Johnson, embarrassed and angry, got to his feet and charged at Sarah like a football player going for a tackle. This time, Sarah didn't try to be gentle. She jumped, planted both feet in his chest, and executed a perfect drop kick that sent him flying backward out the door of the communications center. The sound of Johnson's body hitting the ground outside was loud enough to wake half the base. Within moments, SEALs began emerging from their quarters to see what was happening. What they found was Johnson lying on his back, groaning, and Roberts stumbling out of the communications center, holding his ribs and gasping for air. Sarah emerged last, straightening her uniform and checking to make sure the radio equipment was still functioning. She looked calm and composed, as if nothing unusual had happened. "What the hell is going on here?" shouted Master Chief Petty Officer Williams, the senior enlisted man on the base. Johnson struggled to his feet, his face red with embarrassment and rage. "She attacked us! That crazy bitch attacked us!" Sarah remained silent, knowing that her actions would speak louder than any words. The growing crowd of SEALs looked from Johnson and Roberts, both clearly disheveled and showing signs of having been in a fight, to Sarah, who appeared completely in control. "Is that what happened, Petty Officer Martinez?" Master Chief Williams asked. Sarah straightened to attention. "Master Chief, I was working alone in the communications center when these two men entered without authorization. They had been drinking and began making threats. I defended myself when they became physical." "That's bullshit," Roberts shouted, still catching his breath. "She's lying." But the crowd of SEALs was beginning to murmur among themselves. They knew Johnson and Roberts' reputation. They also knew Sarah's reputation for professionalism and competence, and they could see the evidence of alcohol on the two men's breath and clothing. Master Chief Williams looked around at the crowd that had gathered. Nearly every SEAL on the base was now present, drawn by the commotion. "All right, everyone back to quarters. Johnson, Roberts, you're confined until morning. We'll sort this out with the CO." As the crowd began to disperse, Sarah heard whispered conversations among the SEALs. Some were expressing disbelief that a woman had taken down two of their own. Others were saying it was about time someone put Johnson and Roberts in their place, but all of them were looking at Sarah with a new level of respect. The next morning, Lieutenant Colonel Stevens called all three individuals to his office for a formal investigation. But by then, the story had spread throughout the base. Sarah Martinez, the communications specialist from Texas, had drop-kicked two Navy SEALs and put them both down in front of nearly the entire SEAL community. The investigation would reveal the truth about what had happened in that communications center, and the consequences would change not just Sarah's military career, but the way the SEALs at the base viewed women in combat roles. But that night, as Sarah returned to her quarters, she felt something she hadn't felt since her father had first taught her to stand up for herself. The satisfaction of knowing she had faced her fears and emerged victorious. The real test, however, would come the next day, when the full weight of military justice and SEAL brotherhood would determine whether she had acted appropriately or had crossed a line that could end her career. The morning after the incident, the entire base buzzed with tension and whispered conversations. Word had spread quickly through the ranks about what had happened at the communications center, but the details varied depending on who was telling the story. Some said Sarah had used weapons, others claimed she had military backup, and a few insisted it was all an accident. Lieutenant Colonel Stevens had spent most of the night reviewing regulations and consulting with his superiors about how to handle the situation. Having a female support specialist physically defeat two Navy SEALs was unprecedented, and the implications could be far-reaching for military policy and morale. At over 800 hours, Stevens convened a formal hearing in the base conference room. Present were Sarah, Johnson, Roberts, Master Chief Williams, and 3 other senior SEALs who would serve as witnesses and advisors. The room was stark and utilitarian, with fluorescent lighting that cast harsh shadows on everyone's faces. This hearing is to determine the facts surrounding last night's incident, Stevens began, his voice formal but not unkind. I want to hear from each party involved, and I want the truth. The consequences of what happened here could affect all of our careers. Johnson spoke first. His story painted him and Roberts as victims who had simply gone to check on Sarah's well-being during a stressful time. He claimed they found her acting erratically and that she had attacked them without provocation. Roberts supported this version, adding details about Sarah's unstable behavior and obvious mental breakdown. "Sir," Johnson said, his voice carrying a tone of injured innocence, "we were concerned about Martinez. She'd been working alone for days, barely sleeping. We thought she might need help or someone to talk to. When we entered the communications center, she immediately became hostile and aggressive." Roberts nodded vigorously. "Yes, sir. She seemed paranoid, like she thought we were there to hurt her or something. We tried to calm her down, but she just went crazy. Before we knew it, she was throwing punches and kicks." Stevens listened without comment, making notes on a legal pad. When they finished, he turned to Sarah. "Petty Officer Martinez, what's your version of events?" Sarah had spent the night thinking about how to present her case. She knew that telling the truth might end her military career, but lying would be worse. She stood at attention and spoke clearly. "Sir, at approximately 22:30 hours, I was alone in the communications center monitoring active operations when Johnson and Roberts entered without authorization. Both men showed obvious signs of alcohol consumption. They began making inappropriate comments and moved to block my exit from the center." She paused, maintaining eye contact with Stevens. "Johnson made verbal threats and attempted to physically restrain me. Roberts positioned himself to prevent my escape. I assessed the situation as a clear threat to my safety and defended myself using minimal necessary force." "Minimal force?" Roberts interjected. "You drop-kicked Johnson through the door." "Enough," Stevens said firmly. "Martinez, continue." "Sir, I used techniques designed to disable the threat without causing permanent injury. Both men were mobile and conscious after the altercation. I immediately checked the communications equipment to ensure no damage to critical systems." Stevens made more notes. "Were there any witnesses to the initial confrontation?" "No, sir," Sarah replied. "However, several personnel witnessed the aftermath, including Master Chief Williams." The Master Chief stepped forward. "Sir, I arrived on scene within minutes of the disturbance. I observed Johnson and Roberts outside the communications center, both showing signs of recent physical altercation. Both men had alcohol on their breath." Martinez appeared calm and was checking her equipment for damage. Stevens nodded. "I've also spoken with several SEALs who were present last night. Their accounts are consistent with what we've heard here." He looked at Johnson and Roberts. "I've also reviewed your disciplinary records. This isn't the first time either of you has been counseled about inappropriate behavior toward female personnel." Johnson's face reddened. "Sir, with all due respect, this isn't about our records. This is about a support person assaulting combat personnel. If word gets out that a woman can physically dominate SEALs, it damages the reputation of every operator on this base." "So this is about reputation?" Stevens asked quietly. "Sir, it's about maintaining standards and discipline," Roberts added. "If Martinez gets away with this, what message does that send?" Stevens closed his folder and looked at the 3 senior SEALs who had been observing. "I'd like your input on this situation." Senior Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez, a 20-year veteran with multiple combat deployments, spoke first. "Sir, I've worked with Martinez for 8 months. She's professional, competent, and has never shown any signs of aggressive behavior. Last night's incident appears to be a clear case of self-defense. Lieutenant Commander Walsh, a SEAL team leader, added his perspective. Colonel, I've observed the dynamic between these three individuals. Johnson and Roberts have consistently tested boundaries with Martinez, and she's handled their harassment with remarkable restraint until now. The third advisor, Master Chief Thompson, had remained silent throughout the hearing. When Stevens looked at him expectantly, the grizzled veteran stood up slowly. "Sir, I need to share something with this group," Thompson said. "Last night after the incident, I had conversations with several of my men. What happened in that communications center wasn't just witnessed by a few people. Word spread fast, and by this morning, every SEAL on this base knew the basic facts." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "Sir, the consensus among the men is that Martinez acted appropriately. Johnson and Roberts have been problems waiting to happen, and most of the team leaders are relieved that someone finally stood up to them." Johnson jumped to his feet. "That's bullshit. You're all protecting her because she did what any of us would have done in the same situation," Thompson interrupted. "The difference is, she had the skill and control to handle it without seriously injuring anyone." Stevens held up his hand for silence. "I've made my decision regarding the immediate disciplinary action. However, there's another matter we need to address." He looked at Sarah. "Martinez, your actions last night have created an unusual situation. The men want to know exactly what you're capable of." Sarah felt a knot form in her stomach. "Sir, I don't understand," Rodriguez spoke up. "What the colonel is saying is that the SEALs want to test you properly. Last night was self-defense under stress. But if you're going to continue working with our teams, some of the men want to know your actual capabilities in a controlled environment." "A challenge?" Sarah asked. "More like a demonstration," Walsh added. "Several team members have approached their leaders asking for the opportunity to spar with you in a controlled setting. They want to see if last night was luck, adrenaline, or genuine skill." Stevens nodded. "I'm not ordering you to participate, Martinez, but I think it might actually help your situation here. Right now, there are rumors and speculation flying around. A controlled demonstration could settle things one way or another." Sarah considered her options. She could decline and hope the incident blew over, but she knew that would likely lead to ongoing whispers and doubts about her capabilities. Or she could accept the challenge and prove once and for all that she belonged. "Sir, if this would help maintain unit cohesion and settle questions about my capabilities, I'm willing to participate." "Excellent," Stevens said. "We'll set up a controlled sparring session tomorrow evening. Full safety protocols, medical personnel on standby, and proper supervision. Anyone who wants to participate or observe will be welcome." Johnson and Roberts exchanged glances. "Sir," Johnson said, "we'd like to participate in this demonstration." Thompson laughed grimly. "Son, you had your chance last night. You'd probably be better off sitting this one out." "No," Sarah said quietly. "If Johnson and Roberts want a rematch under controlled conditions, I have no objection." Stevens looked surprised. "Martinez, are you sure about that?" "Yes, sir. I think it's important to settle this matter completely." The next 24 hours passed quickly. Word of the upcoming demonstration spread throughout the base and beyond. Radio chatter indicated that personnel from other nearby bases were asking for permission to attend. Stevens finally had to limit attendance to base personnel only to maintain operational security. Sarah spent the day preparing mentally and physically. She reviewed her martial arts techniques, did light exercises to stay loose, and tried to ignore the growing buzz of conversation around her. Some SEALs approached her with encouragement, others with skepticism, and a few with barely concealed hostility. The demonstration was scheduled for 1,900 hours in the base gymnasium, a large open space that could accommodate the expected crowd. By the time Sarah arrived, nearly every off-duty person on the base was present. The 282 Navy SEALs formed the core of the audience, but support personnel, officers, and even some visiting personnel filled every available space. Master Chief Thompson served as the referee, with medical personnel standing by. The rules were simple: 3 rounds of sparring with different opponents, each round lasting 5 minutes or until one participant yielded or was unable to continue. Standard protective gear would be worn, and excessive force was prohibited. Sarah's first opponent was Petty Officer Martinez, no relation, a competent SEAL with a background in boxing. The match was professional and controlled. Martinez tested Sarah's defenses and striking ability, but it became clear within the first few minutes that Sarah's training was more comprehensive than his. She used throws and grappling techniques that he wasn't prepared for, and the round ended with him tapping out to a rear naked choke. The crowd murmured appreciatively. This wasn't the wild, desperate fighting of the previous night. This was skilled, controlled combat technique. The second opponent was Lieutenant Hayes, a SEAL officer known for his wrestling background. This match was more challenging as Hayes had better takedown defense and ground fighting skills. The round went the full 5 minutes, with both participants showing mutual respect and skill. It ended in a draw, with neither gaining a decisive advantage. By this point, the crowd was fully engaged. The SEALs were analyzing Sarah's technique, noting her use of leverage and timing rather than brute strength. Comments could be heard about her technical precision and tactical intelligence. Then it was time for the final round, and Johnson stepped forward. "Sir," he said to Thompson, "I request permission to face Martinez." Thompson looked at Stevens, who nodded reluctantly. "Johnson, you understand this is a controlled demonstration, not a chance for revenge?" "Yes, sir," Johnson replied, though his eyes burned with anger. As the two faced off, the gymnasium fell silent. This wasn't just about martial arts skill anymore. This was about respect, hierarchy, and the question of whether a woman could truly hold her own in the male-dominated world of special operations. Johnson was bigger, stronger, and angrier than Sarah's previous opponents, but he was also less skilled and more emotional. When Thompson signaled the start of the round, Johnson charged forward with the same reckless aggression he had shown 2 nights before. Sarah was ready. She had spent 2 days thinking about this moment, and she knew exactly how she wanted it to go. Instead of meeting Johnson's charge head-on, she stepped aside at the last moment and used his momentum against him, sending him stumbling past her. The crowd appreciated the technique, and some SEALs began offering quiet commentary on Sarah's tactical approach. "She's fighting smart," someone said, using his aggression against him. Johnson regained his balance and tried again, this time with more control. He attempted to use his reach advantage to keep Sarah at a distance while looking for an opening to take her down. But Sarah had learned from watching his earlier fights. She knew he favored his right hand and tended to drop his left shoulder before throwing a big punch. When Johnson made his move, Sarah was ready. She slipped inside his punch, grabbed his extended arm, and executed the same hip throw she had used 2 nights earlier. But this time, she controlled his landing, placing him on the mat firmly but safely. Johnson tried to scramble back to his feet, but Sarah maintained control, transitioning to a joint lock that forced him to tap out or risk injury to his shoulder. The gymnasium erupted in applause and shouts of approval. The SEALs were on their feet, cheering not just for Sarah's victory, but for the skill and control she had demonstrated. This was what they respected: technical proficiency, tactical intelligence, and the ability to dominate an opponent without unnecessarily injuring them. Johnson lay on the mat for a moment, breathing hard and staring at the ceiling. When he finally stood up, his expression had changed. The anger was gone, replaced by something that might have been respect. "Good fight," he said quietly, extending his hand to Sarah. She shook it firmly. "Thank you for the opportunity to prove myself." Roberts, who had been watching from the sidelines, approached them both. "Martinez," he said, "I owe you an apology. What we did 2 nights ago was wrong, and you handled it better than we deserved." The crowd began to disperse, but many SEALs approached Sarah to offer congratulations and express their newfound respect. The demonstration had accomplished exactly what Stevens had hoped. It had settled questions about Sarah's capabilities and established her place in the unit hierarchy. As the gymnasium emptied, Master Chief Thompson approached Sarah. "That was well done, Martinez. You showed them that skill and intelligence can overcome size and aggression." "Thank you, Master Chief," Sarah replied. "I just wanted to prove that I belong here." "You did more than that," Thompson said with a smile. "You proved that the best warriors aren't always the biggest or the loudest. Sometimes they're the ones who stay calm under pressure and use their brains as much as their brawn." Lieutenant Colonel Stevens waited until the room was nearly empty before approaching Sarah. "Martinez, I want you to know that you've handled this entire situation with exceptional professionalism. Your actions over the past 2 days have demonstrated exactly the kind of character and capability we need in our support personnel." He paused, looking thoughtful. "I'm also putting you in for a commendation. What you did wasn't just about defending yourself. You maintained operational security, protected valuable equipment, and handled a potential incident without escalating it beyond what was necessary." Sarah felt a surge of pride and relief. "Thank you, sir. I just did what I thought was right." "That's exactly why you deserve recognition," Stevens replied. "Good judgment under pressure is one of the most valuable qualities a service member can have." As Sarah walked back to her quarters that evening, she reflected on the events of the past 2 days. She had faced her biggest challenge since joining the military and had emerged stronger for it. The SEALs who had once questioned her presence now treated her with genuine respect. Johnson and Roberts had learned that harassment would not be tolerated, and the entire base had witnessed a demonstration of what she was capable of. But perhaps most importantly, Sarah had proven to herself that all her years of training and preparation had been worthwhile. She belonged in this world not because anyone had given her permission to be there, but because she had earned her place through skill, determination, and courage. The story of what happened that night would follow her for the rest of her military career, but it would no longer be a source of doubt or questioning. Instead, it would be a reminder that sometimes the smallest person in the room is also the most dangerous, and that respect is something that must be earned, not demanded. 6 months after the incident that would become known throughout special operations circles as the night Martinez dropped 2 SEALs, the reverberations were still being felt far beyond the remote Afghan base where it happened. Sarah had returned to her duties with a new level of respect from everyone on the base. The SEALs no longer saw her as an outsider trying to prove herself. She was now simply another member of the team who happened to be exceptionally skilled in hand-to-hand combat. More importantly, her expertise in communications and cultural affairs had made her an indispensable part of several successful operations. The change in dynamics was subtle, but profound. When Sarah entered the chow hall, conversations didn't stop the way they used to. SEALs would nod acknowledgement or invite her to sit with their groups. During mission briefings, her input was sought and valued, not tolerated. She had become what she had always wanted to be, a respected professional who happened to be a woman rather than a woman trying to be accepted by men. Johnson and Roberts had undergone their own transformation. The embarrassment of being defeated by Sarah had initially made them bitter and resentful, but the public demonstration had changed something fundamental in their attitudes. They began to understand that their harassment hadn't just been inappropriate, it had been based on false assumptions about women's capabilities. Johnson, in particular, seemed to undergo a complete personality change. He approached Sarah a few weeks after the demonstration with an unusual request. "Martinez," he said during a quiet moment in the communications center, "I was wondering if you might be willing to teach some of us your techniques." Sarah looked up from her equipment, surprised. "You want me to teach you martial arts?" "Not just me," Johnson replied, looking slightly embarrassed. "Several of the guys have been talking. We realize that your training gives you advantages that our standard military combatives don't cover. We could learn from you." This request led to something unprecedented on the base: a female support specialist teaching advanced fighting techniques to Navy SEALs. Sarah began conducting weekly training sessions in the gymnasium, focusing on techniques that emphasized leverage and technique over brute strength. The classes were voluntary, but they quickly became some of the most popular training sessions on the base. Master Chief Thompson became one of Sarah's most enthusiastic supporters. "What Martinez teaches isn't just about fighting," he explained to Lieutenant Colonel Stevens. "She's showing these men that there are always new things to learn, and that expertise can come from unexpected sources." The training sessions also served another purpose. They demonstrated to the SEALs that working with women as equals could actually make them better at their jobs. Sarah's different perspective on combat situations, her emphasis on de-escalation when possible, and her technical approach to problem-solving added new dimensions to their tactical thinking. Word of the unusual training program eventually reached higher command levels. A visiting general, curious about reports of a female support specialist teaching SEALs, decided to observe one of Sarah's sessions. He watched as she demonstrated techniques for escaping from larger opponents and using environmental advantages in close-quarters combat. After the session, he approached Sarah with an offer that would change the trajectory of her military career. "Petty Officer Martinez," General Harrison said, "I've been watching your work here with great interest. How would you feel about helping us develop new training protocols for close-quarters combat?" Sarah was stunned. "Sir, I'm honored, but I'm not sure I understand." "We're always looking for ways to improve our training methods," the general explained. "Your approach to combat, particularly your emphasis on technical skill over physical strength, could be valuable for training all our personnel. I'd like to offer you a position at our Special Warfare Training Center in California." The offer represented everything Sarah had dreamed of when she first enlisted. She would be directly involved in training future special operations personnel and helping to shape military doctrine. But it also meant leaving the team she had worked so hard to become part of. After careful consideration and discussions with her father and former mentor Marcus, Sarah accepted the position. Her departure from Afghanistan was marked by something she never could have imagined when she first arrived: a farewell ceremony attended by every SEAL on the base. Lieutenant Colonel Stevens presented her with a unit citation for exceptional service, but the moment that meant the most to Sarah came when Master Chief Thompson stepped forward with a gift from the entire SEAL community. "Martinez," he said, his voice unusually formal, "the men wanted to give you something to remember us by." He handed her a small wooden plaque with the SEAL Trident insignia and an engraved message: "Honorary SEAL, earned through courage, skill, and determination." "Sir," Sarah said, her voice breaking slightly, "I can't accept this. I haven't completed SEAL training." Thompson smiled. "The men voted on it unanimously. As far as we're concerned, you've proven yourself in the ways that matter most. You've earned the right to carry that." Even Johnson and Roberts were present for the ceremony. Johnson stepped forward and spoke for both of them. "Martinez," he said, "we owe you more than an apology. You showed us that being a warrior isn't about who you are or what you look like. It's about what you do when it counts. You made us better SEALs and better men." Sarah's new position in California exceeded her expectations in every way. She was assigned to the Naval Special Warfare Development Group, where she worked with a team of instructors and researchers to develop new training protocols for close-quarters combat and survival situations. Her first major project involved creating a training course that taught techniques for overcoming larger, stronger opponents. Drawing from her martial arts background and her experience working with SEALs, she developed a curriculum that emphasized situational awareness, technical precision, and psychological preparation. The course was initially tested with female military personnel who might find themselves in combat situations, but its effectiveness led to its adoption across all special operations training programs. Sarah's techniques were now being taught to Army Rangers, Air Force Special Operations, and Marine Force recon units. As her reputation grew, Sarah began receiving speaking invitations from military academies and training institutions. She spoke about the importance of diverse perspectives in military planning, the value of technical skill over raw physical ability, and the need to constantly evolve training methods to meet new challenges. During one such speaking engagement at the Naval Academy, a young female midshipman approached her after her presentation. "Ma'am," the midshipman said, "I wanted to thank you for what you've done. When I was deciding whether to apply for special operations training, everyone told me I wasn't physically capable. But after hearing about your story and your techniques, I know that there might be a place for me." Sarah smiled, remembering her own doubts and fears when she first joined the military. "The only limits that matter are the ones you accept," she told the young woman. "If you're willing to work harder than everyone around you and never give up on yourself, you'll find that place." 3 years after leaving Afghanistan, Sarah received news that filled her with pride. The base where she had served was implementing a new anti-harassment program based partly on her experiences. More importantly, the program emphasized that respect in the military was earned through competence and character, not granted based on gender or rank. Johnson, who had remained in touch with Sarah through occasional emails, had been promoted to senior petty officer and was now helping to train new SEALs in the same techniques Sarah had taught him. He wrote to tell her that her influence had changed not just his approach to training, but his entire worldview about what made someone a good soldier. "You taught us that the strongest person isn't always the one who can lift the most weight or run the fastest mile," he wrote. "Sometimes it's the person who can stay calm when everyone else is losing their heads and find a solution when everyone else sees only problems." Sarah's father, now retired from the factory and living comfortably thanks to his daughter's success, often told people about his daughter's accomplishments. But when asked what he was most proud of, he always gave the same answer. "I'm proud that she never forgot what I taught her about fighting for the right reasons," he would say. "She could have used her skills to hurt people or to prove she was better than others. Instead, she used them to protect herself and to teach others. That's what real strength looks like." Marcus, Sarah's old martial arts instructor, had followed her career with enormous pride. When she visited him during a brief leave, he reflected on how his lessons about control and discipline had played out in her military service. "I always told you that fighting was about protecting people who couldn't protect themselves," he said as they walked through his old gym. "You took that lesson and applied it in ways I never could have imagined. You protected not just yourself, but the idea that everyone deserves to be judged by their actions, not their appearance." By her 5th year in the Navy, Sarah had been promoted to Senior Chief Petty Officer and was being considered for a commission as an officer. Her training programs had been adopted by special operations units around the world, and she had become a sought-after consultant for military organizations looking to improve their combat training. But perhaps the most significant change was in military culture itself. The incident that had started with harassment and violence had evolved into a catalyst for broader conversations about respect, capability, and the value of diversity in military units. A documentary film crew, interested in making a movie about women in combat roles, approached Sarah about telling her story. After careful consideration and consultation with military public affairs officials, she agreed to participate, hoping that her experience might inspire other women considering military careers. During the filming, the director asked her to reflect on the night that had changed everything. "People often ask me if I regret what happened," Sarah said, looking directly into the camera. "They want to know if I wish I had handled things differently, or if I think the confrontation could have been avoided. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I think everything happened exactly the way it needed to. Not because violence is ever the preferred solution, but because sometimes people only understand strength when they see it demonstrated. What started as harassment became an opportunity to prove that respect can't be given. It has to be earned. And what would you say to young women who might be considering military service but are worried about facing similar challenges? Sarah smiled. I would tell them that challenges are opportunities in disguise. Every person who doubts your capabilities is giving you a chance to prove them wrong. Every obstacle you overcome makes you stronger and more confident. And every time you succeed in spite of the odds, you make it easier for the people who come after you. The documentary, when it was released, became a sensation within military circles and beyond. Sarah's story resonated with people who had faced discrimination or harassment in their own careers, regardless of whether they were in the military. More importantly, it contributed to ongoing policy discussions about women in combat roles. While Sarah had never been officially designated as a combat operator, her experiences and capabilities had demonstrated that gender was not a reliable predictor of combat effectiveness. 10 years after the night she drop-kicked 2 Navy SEALs, Sarah was serving as a Master Chief Petty Officer and was the senior enlisted advisor for the Navy's Special Operations Training Command. She had been married for 3 years to a fellow Navy officer she had met during a joint training exercise, and they were expecting their first child. The base where her career-defining moment had occurred was now home to the Martinez Center for Combat Excellence, a training facility specializing in close-quarters combat and survival techniques. The center trained personnel from all branches of the military and had gained international recognition for its innovative approaches to combat training. Johnson, now a Master Chief himself, had become one of the center's senior instructors. When asked about working in a facility named after someone he had once harassed, he was characteristically direct. Every day I walk into this building, I'm reminded of the most important lesson I ever learned, he said. I learned that my assumptions about people's capabilities were not just wrong, they were dangerous. Sarah Martinez didn't just defend herself that night. She saved me from becoming someone I wouldn't have been able to live with. Roberts had left the military after completing his enlistment, but had used the discipline and skills he learned from Sarah to become a successful martial arts instructor. He often told his students the story of the woman who had taught him that true strength comes from controlling your emotions and using your intelligence, not from intimidating others. As Sarah prepared for the birth of her child, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. From a small Texas town to the heights of military special operations, her path had been marked by challenges that had forced her to prove herself again and again. But what she valued most was not the recognition or the success she had achieved. It was the knowledge that her actions had made it possible for other women to serve in roles that had previously been closed to them, and that she had helped change minds about what it meant to be a warrior. The baby, when she arrived, was named Hope Martinez Collins. As Sarah held her daughter for the first time, she thought about the world this little girl would grow up in. A world where her gender would be less likely to define her opportunities and where her capabilities would be measured by her actions, not her appearance. Your grandmother would be proud, Sarah whispered to her sleeping daughter. And your grandfather definitely will be. Master Chief Thompson, now retired but still in touch with many of his former colleagues, often spoke about Sarah's legacy when he addressed new classes of SEAL trainees. The night Martinez put down Johnson and Roberts wasn't just about one woman defending herself, he would tell them. It was about all of us learning that warrior spirit doesn't care about your size, your gender, or your background. It only cares about your courage, your skill, and your willingness to do what's right when it matters most. The story of that night had become legend, told and retold in military circles around the world. But for Sarah, It remained what it had always been. A reminder that sometimes you have to fight for your place in the world, and that when you do fight, you should fight with honor, skill, and the determination to make things better for everyone who comes after you. 20 years later, the military had changed dramatically. Women served in combat roles across all branches, and mixed-gender units were the norm rather than the exception. New recruits learned about Sarah's story as part of their training in military history and leadership, though many of them found it hard to believe there was ever a time when a woman's presence in special operations was controversial. Sarah, now a senior military officer and mother of 3, continued to serve as an advocate for military personnel who faced discrimination or harassment. She had established a foundation that provided martial arts training and self-defense instruction to at-risk youth, teaching them the same lessons about confidence and resilience that had served her throughout her career. When asked about her legacy, Sarah always returned to the same theme. The most important battles aren't always fought on foreign soil against enemy forces. Sometimes they're fought in gymnasiums and conference rooms and communication centers against prejudice and low expectations and the assumption that some people aren't capable of greatness. The night I dropped those 2 SEALs taught me something that I try to remember every day. You don't have to be the biggest or the strongest to win a fight. You just have to be the most prepared, the most determined, and the most willing to do whatever it takes to protect what matters to you. As she spoke those words to yet another group of young military personnel, Sarah noticed a young woman in the audience taking careful notes. After the presentation, the woman approached her with a question that took Sarah back to her own early days in the military. "Ma'am," the young sailor said, "I'm about to start special operations training. And some people have told me I'm not cut out for it because I'm too small. What would you do if you were in my position?" Sarah smiled, seeing her younger self in this earnest young woman. "I would remember that every person who doubts your capabilities is giving you motivation to prove them wrong. I would train harder than anyone expects and never accept limitations that other people try to place on you. And I would never forget that the most powerful weapon you possess isn't your physical strength. It's your determination to never give up. And if someone tries to intimidate you or make you feel like you don't belong," Sarah's expression grew serious, "then you show them exactly what you're made of, not with anger or aggression, but with skill, professionalism, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you've earned your place. And if they still don't get the message—" She paused, her eyes twinkling with the memory of that long-ago night in Afghanistan. "Well, sometimes people need a more direct demonstration of what respect looks like." The young woman left that day with a new sense of determination and a story that would inspire her through the challenging months ahead. And Sarah knew that the legacy of that night, the night she drop-kicked her way into military history, would continue to resonate with future generations of warriors who understood that true strength comes not from intimidating others, but from never allowing anyone to make you feel less than what you are. The circle was complete, but the story continued, carried forward by every person who refused to accept limitations and every warrior who understood that the greatest battles are fought not just with weapons, but with courage, determination, and the unshakable belief that everyone deserves to be judged by the content of their character and the quality of their actions.